Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and a very good morning. Honorable Datuk Suryani Datuk Ahmad, Secretary General, Ministry of Entrepreneur Development and the Cooperatives MADAC. Honorable Datuk Sri Haji Hasnul Zamzam bin Haji Ahmad, Secretary General, Ministry of Domestic Trade and Consumer Affairs KPDN HEP. The Honorable Datuk Beatrice Nirmala, Chief Executive Officer, the IBR Asia Group. Professor Pervaiz K. Ahmed, Director, Institute for Global Strategy and Competitiveness, Sunway University. Mr. Girish Ramachandran, Executive Director of 27 Advisory, Sindram Berhad. And Mr. Mark Forney, Urban Specialist from World Bank. Welcome to the High Dialogue 1, Pathway to Inclusive Growth and Resilient Economic Recovery. Without further ado, we would like to invite Mr. Mark Forney, the Lead Urban Resilience Specialist from World Bank, to moderate the session. Please be invited. Mr. Mark Forney, the screen is yours.
Wow, glad to have a lunch.
The floor is yours, Mr. Mark Forney.
I should start now?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for joining this interesting event. We have a great session of panelists who are going to give a few remarks from their perspective and where they sit. And then we're going to have a discussion following that with audience participation. Just as a quick background, my name is Mark Forney. I'm a lead urban resilience specialist within the World Bank. I've worked in most regions of the world. And in addition to my experience with the World Bank and working with national governments and with local governments, I have some experience in the financial markets and investment banking. So, this type of topic that we're talking about, how do we move towards a more sustainable approach to cities going forward with the recognition of the impacts of COVID that has demonstrated how interconnected we are, combined with the impacts in the recent IPCC report, the really concrete impacts of climate change. Everything that we do all around the world is connected. How we plan and invest in Vietnam, where I sit, will somehow affect in Malaysia and vice versa. So in considering the interconnectedness of all of us, this a key theme that seems to be emerging over the past couple of years, during the past 2 years. And how do we plan and invest moving towards a low carbon environment is an important question. And we need to recognize that advances in technology have really reduced the cost of interventions where 5 years ago there was a trade-off between sustainability and business and economics, and now that's not exactly the case, and that's changing rapidly. So what I'd like to do is start to introduce the panelists and ask each of them to present for about 7 minutes, and following that, I may have a follow-up question for each after the group presents, and then following that, we'll open up to the audience. The first person I'd like to introduce is Dr. Suryani Ahmed, the Secretary General from the Ministry of Entrepreneur Development and Cooperatives. She has vast experience in trade and industry, as she served in the Ministry of International Trade and Industry for 12 years. Before being appointed as a special officer to the Minister of International Trade and Industry in 2006, she was the Assistant Secretary for Bilateral and Regional Division, as well as the ASEAN Economic Cooperation Division. In 2015, she was transferred to the Ministry of Home Affairs as the Deputy Secretary General for Policy and Control, and she was then promoted as the Secretary General for the Ministry of Women, Family, and Community Development in 2017. In 2018, Dr. Suryani became the director of the National Institute of Public Administration. And on July 1st, 2019, she was appointed as the Secretary General of the Ministry of Communications and Multimedia Malaysia. As of November 4, 2020, Dr. Suryani is now the Secretary General of Ministry of Entrepreneurial Development and Cooperatives. I'd like to turn it over to her now for about 7 minutes to present some remarks, and I will make sure that we stick to the time. Thank you.
Datuk Suryani, you are invited to give some speech. Please be invited. While waiting for Datuk Suryani Datuk Ahmad, we will be inviting Datuk Sri Haji Hasnul Zamzam bin Haji Ahmad to deliver his speech. Please be invited, Datuk.
Maybe it would be helpful before the speech is presented for me to just give a quick bio. Datuk Sri Hasnul Zamzam holds a Bachelor in Urban Planning from the University of Salt Lake City, from the University of Utah, in Salt Lake City in the United States, and a master's degree in planning from the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia in the United States. He holds a Diploma of Public Administration from the Institute of Public Administration, and he has held posts in various government bodies and ministries, such as the Prime Minister's Department, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Higher Education, the Ministry of Health and Royal Malaysian Custom Development between the years 2002 and 2019. He also served as a Senior Deputy Secretary General of the Prime Minister's Department from 2019, prior to his latest appointment as the Secretary General of the Ministry of Domestic Trade and Consumer Affairs in February 2020. Thank you.
We would like to invite Datuk Sri Haji Hasnul Zamzam bin Haji Ahmad to deliver his speech. Please be invited, Datuk, if you are ready. And moving on to Mr. Girish Ramachandran, the Executive Director of 27 Advisory Sdn Bhd, we would like to invite you to take the screen. Please be invited.
Sure, thank you. Urbanists, and I think we've managed to have a session without people logging in, I think. So the important thing is to make sure that everybody's logged in first, right? Because I think the host is unable to see who's in and out. Don't worry about an introduction, Mark. I think we will get straight into it. Our title of today is looking at inclusive growth and resilient economic recovery. And I've got a short presentation to sort of set the tone, but what I thought I'd try to address is context. So in Malaysia right now, we are faced with two major problems. One is essentially around jobs. We need to create a significant amount of jobs. And with the COVID pandemic lingering on, it's becoming ever so difficult to replace those jobs that have been lost, as well as moving forward. The second issue is really around what I would call societal issues around inclusive growth. And this is where I feel a sort of a change in the way we're approaching economic recovery in Malaysia could go into a particular strategy. So I've got a couple of slides here, and I'd like to introduce, it's not a new concept, but it's something that's been done before in many cities and countries. It's around the innovation districts. And I thought I'd set that tone for maybe the Q&A later. Could I have my slides up, please? The concept of innovation districts are essentially around making sure that we are able to have academia, industry, with investors, as well as the knowledge-intensive industries taking a leap forward. It's essentially around high concentration of people working in knowledge-intensive industries. And the whole concept of it is to mix everything into physical spaces with natural environment. Now, it's about innovation. What I'm talking about is innovation. And this is going to be the only thing that can get us out of where we are right now, especially in Malaysia. We have lagged on all the indicators, especially the urban indicators. And I know it's a longer term strategy, but this is a winning solution that will work. In innovation districts, we have seen that they actually solve problems. Yeah, so we have many problems from last mile issues to jobs to income level to even urban challenges, as we have seen from some of the opening remarks that were made. If we can move to the next slide. So the strategy here is to use innovation districts to essentially tackle those issues that are faced, whether it's health issues or health, human-centric, and so on. And the wonderful thing about the innovation district is it actually provides 4 to 5 additional production and service jobs for every one innovation-intensive job. Yeah, and this essentially provides about 50% of the whole district itself. And these districts can be as small as, a 2-acre site to a 1,000-hectare township. It really depends on the scale. It uses the natural environment that we have. So in Malaysia, we have a lot of things around agriculture that we can take forward. The biotechnology sector, which comes from the waste from agriculture. We also have a pretty strong group of clusters. For example, the semiconductor cluster in Malaysia. The other clusters we see are eventually around tourism. I think there's a lot of opportunity on tourism. So the strategy here is essentially to look at how we can make the whole model inclusive, right? And that's what the topic is about. Can we go to the next slide? So how this works is it essentially has 3 levels of networks. You have urban infra, which is crucial, which has to be connected and to support the innovation. And then you've got the organizational structures that essentially are able to promote the best ideas so that we're able to take those ideas forward, solving complex problems with a network of talents. Yeah, and that's the thing. Next slide. And essentially, there are 3 segments here. You need strong government policy planning, which is where World Bank, I believe, has got a lot of fantastic analysis that has been done on Malaysia. And it's about making the policies work so that they're agile and they can implement. The second component is the digital infra. Yeah, we cannot run away from digital infra. And we've got our 5G plan in place, which is a fantastic base for us to plan the next level of innovation. And then comes the RDCI components, which are essentially all the technology sandboxes and so on, and to drive it. And these 3 things can come together in what we term an innovation district. And I'm thinking this is a strategy. Can I go to the last slide? And what this does is it essentially uses the urban landscape and evolve or adapt and change them so that they can accommodate more innovation districts. And I think if we have a couple of examples that we can use as a base and build on this, we've got a winning strategy here for Malaysia that can solve the job take-up. And more importantly is we've got natural clusters of economic activity that we can move forward. So this is my starting statement here on how we can have something more inclusive and something that really looks at this economic resilience and from an urban landscape perspective. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks very much, Garish, for the presentation and the focus on jobs. We all sit in different worlds in the way we do business with our clients, and sometimes we miss certain areas of focus. And jobs is absolutely fundamental. And what types of investments can government make to catalyze jobs? What types of things can government do to increase skills in the knowledge economy is really critical to understanding what type of pathway is the most efficient for sustainable development in the coming years in our cities. Maybe just to go backwards, I'll quickly just introduce Garish for those in the audience that aren't familiar with him. He's a co-founder of 27 Group, which is a network of management consulting firms offering business solutions in strategy, financial, and program management. He spent 24 years of experience under his belt, carrying out more than 270 positional assessments, from business viability reviews, feasibility studies, proposal evaluations, strategy exercises, and various other consultancy assignments. Over the years, Garish has worked in various nation-building projects in ASEAN. Some of the notable experience that he has in recent years is Malaysia's Smart City Framework, Malaysia's National Policy Framework for 4IR technology adoption, and the midterm review of the Malaysia Construction Industry and Transformation Program. Thank you very much for the remarks, and I'm sure that there will be some questions in the discussion about how exactly we can get there. Next, I would like to introduce Beatrice Nirmala, who's the Chief Executive Officer of IBR Asia Group. She's the founder, director, and CEO of this group, and she's led the company through many milestones since its inception in 1997. She's driven by a passion for delivering the best approaches to clients, a zeal for inspiring her team to give their utmost with a can-do, never-say-die attitude. In the 20 years, she steered IBR Asia Group into becoming a niche media player in Malaysia. The company gained renown for its proprietary business publication, International Business Review, as well as producing bespoke publications for leading organizations in Malaysia. So the floor is over to you, Beatrice.
Thanks, Mark. Can you hear me, everyone? Yeah, okay, great. So I'm looking at that one sentence that you said, that interconnectedness of all of us. I think that was superb, it's brilliant. I think there's a lot we can learn from other countries as well, because no man is an island and no states are an island. So what I'm going to do is later on, I'm going to present to you some slides, or not yet, some slides on this. But before that, I'd like to go into before the slides go on, I want to talk about how, because my slide is going to be about ASEAN, how we can actually work together collaboratively with all over ASEAN to be able to do the best for us. But individually, as per countries, I have a few suggestions. I think the most important thing for a city to have a smart city, to have a resilient economic recovery that's good for the people, is we should have electric cars. We should really strive towards having changing all our fossil fuel cars into electric cars. And the one big setback to that is that we have very high tariffs on the electric cars. The electric cars really do not give much pollution at all. And if we are really if we're really careful for having less carbon, and carbon polluting the environment, then we should have electric cars. So my two suggestions to the government, and we actually require government willpower, government political will to be able to do this, is to remove the tariffs, because electric cars at the moment are quite expensive. If you can make it really affordable, and secondly, have charging stations all over the city and all over the country, nationwide, then that move or that drive from having fossil fuel cars to electric cars would actually be so much more smoother. I know everyone wants to have an electric car, me too, but Tesla is expensive. So that's one thing we should do to make our individual cities in Malaysia itself less congested and having less smog, which is really very unhealthy. And secondly, what we need to have is, once you have electric cars and this is a vision, yeah? So once we have the electric cars in and we have less smog and pollution in a congested city, the next step is to have a lot more walking or cycling pathways, which is not there yet in our cities. You look at Kuala Lumpur, you look at Petaling Jaya, these are the two most congested cities, and you do not see walking or cycling pathways. You have to go really far away to forests, like tamans or parks, and be able to do your walking. Whereas we look at more advanced cities, you have walking and cycling pathways very strategically built within our cities. And that's so important because one, it encourages exercising, which is really useful, because what's the point of a smart city, resilient economic recovery, inclusive growth, if the people aren't healthy? So one way to get people healthy is to make it easy for them to travel from one place to another, either by walking or by cycling, and by having a very clean environment around it. So I would say then, probably if I may, that you should also encourage, we have a lot of television, we have a lot of media, and we should actually use all our media to be able to encourage people to get into cycling instead of driving everywhere. People drive from their house to a 2 kilometer away shop just by using their car. Everything is by cars, and that's not going to be healthy. Yes, I know we have a very hot environment, but I think we can encourage walking and cycling. There has to be a bit of money spent. Walking and cycling pathways should have been covered, and that would, in a congested city, that makes a lot of difference. And it also shelters us from the rain. Another thing that I think we should do is we should have waste to energy centers within cities itself. So right now we take all our recycling, we take all our waste, and we go far away and we go to landfills and we fill up the land with a lot of rubbish. So our landfills are getting filled. And where do we go from there? We can't even use landfills for anything else. And in a city that's growing, our land area is compromised. It's compromised with lots of landfill. But if you have waste to energy centers, and I know that's being worked on right now in PJ, but if you have the waste to energy centers in the middle of the city itself, your waste is recycled or is immediately converted to energy and fed into the grid. Now, this is not rocket science. This is being done right now, but we should have more of that. In every city, in all over Malaysia, we should have that. Waste to energy centers within the cities. And the next thing that I think is important to talk about would be affordable housing. When you have a lot of work concentrated around city centers, your housing becomes extremely expensive. And that's where we need to be able to encourage satellite cities. You have satellite cities. If you look at London, you have Brentwood, Crawley, Chelmsford, and these are satellite cities that feed into the city centers. And we should be focusing on that for Malaysia too. In all our states, wherever you have a concentration of population in your city center, in your major city center, you should have satellite cities that actually allow people to live there with affordable housing and to be able to work in the city centers. And that solves a lot of housing woes for people and also frees up the congestion in the cities. So now when you have good satellite cities, when you have the satellite cities, it comes together with connectivity. So you have your satellite cities clustered around your city centers, and then you should have really good connectivity so that it becomes affordable for even travel. So you have affordable housing in your satellite city, and you should have affordable traveling from the satellite cities to your city centers. So that would be what we want to do individually in our countries, what we can actually be in control of right now within ourselves, for our states, and within our nationwide, within our country. But very importantly, I think to grow the next level to a further stage, we need to look at a pathway for where there's a need for an ASEAN concentric plan to tackle sustainable urban growth. So let me start with my slides. Okay. Can you all see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so let's go to the first one, urbanization in ASEAN. Now, if you can read my slide, should I make it bigger? No. Okay, so this topic is more important than ever as we prepare to get out of the pandemic, which has affected us all. But I want to talk about how that even before COVID, urbanization was already a major concern for ASEAN. By 2050, the urban population in ASEAN is expected to grow to 525 million, up from 320 million people in 2018. This will lead to the proportion of people living in cities in ASEAN rising from 47% as of 2014 to 65%. In addition, the additional 200 small cities will also be formed between 215 to 2050 as 5 nations transition from minority urban population to majority urban population. The increase in urban population is going to pose a number of challenges, particularly in terms of competition for resources, living spaces, and jobs. In addition, a higher urbanized population will result in greater demand for energy and more municipal waste being produced, resulting in higher amounts of pollution. This is not to mention that as cities grow, the amount of land available for agriculture is also greatly reduced. Now, these problems pose a challenge to the realization of the new urban agenda, in particular, several sustainable development goals, namely your SDG 1, which aims for no poverty, SDG 2, which aims for zero hunger, and SDG 7, which aims for decent work and economic growth. The solutions to the challenges can only be found through a regional effort. As stated in the UNEP report, which says the ASEAN bloc should expand cross-ASEAN knowledge networks to focus on key urban development topics of common concern. Therefore, the problem of urbanization can be best tackled by stakeholders in ASEAN coming together to work out sustainable solutions to the various challenges mentioned before. And in doing so, create more opportunities for sustainable industries to thrive, thus generating jobs. And what I believe is needed is a platform that will enable knowledge sharing across the region. And this platform should be digital to reflect how ASEAN aims to become a digital economy and also to enable quicker, real-time coordination. So I'm actually really happy to reveal that we're already working on such a platform. We have developed Voice of ASEAN. This is to bring businesses, governments, and other organizations in ASEAN together to share ideas and opportunities that will help enhance the growth of the region. I believe the Voice of ASEAN can play a role in helping to address the issue of urbanization, and we are excited to do so. Now, a little bit of introduction about us, which I think was not given, that we have actually worked together with the Selangor government to be able to roll out the Selangor Smart Cities agenda. And we have actually written a book on the smart cities agenda together with the Selangor government. So we do know a lot about smart cities, and the plan, we've had 3 years of working on forums to be able to get government and corporate together to talk about how we can connect the dots for smart cities. Selangor wants to be a smart city by 2025. And our objective was to help the Selangor state government to achieve just that. So we are very happy to be able to present this platform, and we hope to work together with any parties that would want our help to be able to do just that, since now we have a platform. And that's my session for today, and we're open for questions and answers later.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. I think those are that's some good food for thought. I just want to reflect on your first point, actually, and tie that back to your last point. Electric vehicles are certainly booming, and they're moving forward very quickly because of different types of consumer demand. And being able to segment out and identify and bring people into that market is fundamental. One of the things that needs to be brought into that market is a price is cheaper. Oftentimes, when you consider the life cycle of a vehicle, and if we look at motorbikes in particular, and that's something we're doing a lot in Vietnam right now, the price of an electric motorbike pays for itself if you're like a Grab driver or a delivery driver. You use that motorbike 60, 70,000 kilometers a year. It's cheaper to buy an electric motorbike and use it for 1 year than to have the combustion bike. So
Exactly.
It pays for itself in the first year. And that's
but
because
what I'm saying is perhaps we remove the heavy taxes on them. There's the same amount of tax on them as there is for fossil fuel cars. So that I don't understand, because the government is really concerned about reducing pollution, and that's one way we can actually get more people to be included in buying them. But I totally agree with your point. It's worth it. It's so worth it in every way.
And the price of batteries has gone down 89% just between 2010 and 2019. And people don't realize that. Like, it's a totally different dynamic now than just a couple of years ago. And that's where the publications and knowledge sharing is really important, because it just makes financial sense. And we think actually marketing and making them cool is also an important thing, because a lot of people in Vietnam, at least, don't like electric bikes. They see them as not strong enough. And in fact, the fastest bike on the road is electric. So
they think that there's not enough power, right? That acceleration is not there, but that's not true, because I've done a lot of research on them. They are excellent.
Exactly. Well, I think we can go on, but let me introduce the next person, then we'll get to the panel discussion. The next panelist is Professor Pervez Ahmed. Professor Pervez is a director at the Institute of Global Strategy and Competitiveness at Sunway University. He's published extensively in international journals, and he's a regular keynote speaker, having won numerous awards, academic awards, for his research. He served as an editor, and he sat on editorial boards of several international journals. And his research interests, they cut across entrepreneurship, religion, ethics, and social responsibility. He has extensive experience working with and advising blue chip companies and public sector organizations such as Unilever, Ford, AT&T, NCR, British Telecommunications, and the NHS in Europe. So over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Mark. I hope you can hear me clearly. It's great to be here. Thank you very much for Urbanist also to invite me to this particular forum, a very important forum and a great platform for dialogue. I just want to give you a little bit of a background about myself and also my work. I mean, I think I just want to really start by emphasizing something that everybody really knows, and that is that cities are really very complex ecosystems. And really what makes them flourish and what makes them decay really depends on system dynamics that play out. And this is especially the case when we are dealing with shocks or disruptions like COVID or climate change. So as we encounter these particular shocks, the system actually changes. And the systems are at different levels. So we can look at the system at the global level. We can look at it, as Beatrice was saying, at the ASEAN level, the national level. Then we can go to particular cities as well. So and clearly our interest here is in the urban agenda. My own research interest really began in this area long time back when I was back in England, when I really began to be interested in understanding what makes businesses live, what makes them flourish and become dynamic and resilient to changing environments. And this was a strand of research was started back in the 80s by Ari Gears of Shell, who also wanted to ask that same question: why do some companies live and why do others die? What is taking place? And when I started looking at this at a broader level, at the ecosystem level, and I and my team looked at this, what we found is that there is a DNA that actually is critical. It's like the basis that we have, the CGT, AT, this of a DNA. What is it that we need to actually have to have resilient ecosystems? What we really uncovered that is that there are actually three essential bases that are critical to create resilience in ecosystems, whether they're national level or at a lower level.
Ini tajuk kita.
So the first base is the absorptive capacity, which is really about sensing your environment and shifting with that particular environment. And it's about learning and feedback loops are very, very important when we're sort of looking at systems. And it's about sort of what is sort of taking place over here. And if we sort of look at what we're sort of seeing is that when we looked at the COVID as it sort of came on, we were actually really occupied with the agenda, the change that was coming through from the climate change issues and climate change, and that type of shock is gradual. It's actually slow compared to what COVID is. COVID is very different. It was quick. It was contagious. It had very direct impact on people's lives. So it's a very different type of shock that we're actually facing. And our sensors really were too narrow. They were too preoccupied, and the world was actually caught unawares. And Malaysia is no exception. And urban cities were, suffered as a sort of consequence. So we see that our sensing system has to be in place for us to be able to respond in the right way to sort of revitalize and regenerate our cities and our nation states as well. But we sort of see that this sensitivity needs to sort of be continuous and keep giving us feedback. As COVID persisted over time, we needed to have understanding of who are the vulnerable groups, how are they being impacted, what is happening to them, what are the actions that we need to take place. So this sensing is very important for us to sort of to bounce back as it was. The second component or capability is adaptive. This is the ability to configure the information that we're getting, the facts that we're learning from the world, the best practices that we're learning, whether they were happening in the US, whether they were happening in Europe or in China, as those developments are taking place. So we have to sort of be able to use information sensibly to make changes in our response. And this is about sort of really about assimilation and adaptive response. And what does it mean? So really, that is about the SOPs that we're sort of developing, the understanding and the knowledge that we're building on the viruses, developing sort of the vaccines, and then actually sort of implementing vaccines to get a herd immunity effect. So this is all about some of the adaptations. And I sort of usually my view of this is the analogy I was going to say it's like a ball. When you throw it down, it bounces back. So when we're talking about a bounce back in our urban cities, this is really still an adaptive response. We're just sort of making those. And we must remember when we drop a ball, it doesn't always bounce all the way back to the same place or to the same level. So the energy is often dissipated. People in COVID, for example, have lost their lives. People have lost their jobs. We've lost competences and skills. We've lost industry sectors. Some of them are being decimated. So the bounce back is about containment, and then perhaps it's a little bit about sort of going back to the same level of normalcy, but perhaps not. So the bounce back is just really an initial stage and not the end stage of resilience. And the last base that we sort of find important and over through our research links in with what Girish was saying, innovative capability. And this is really about reconfiguring. It's about actually sort of not being static but moving forward. So I call it sort of the bounce forward positive. And when you throw a ball, it bounces forwards. It doesn't sort of bounce in the same place. But when you throw the ball, this bounce must actually, when it bounces the second time around, it must bounce higher. It must build on where you were. And so the bounce should go higher and higher. So it should take you forwards in a positive way, rather than naturally going back to the normal. So this notion of we will go to business as usual, well, business as usual will not be there. And we really need to really think about reconfiguring our capabilities and our responses to the challenges that we actually face. I mean, I guess one of the sort of bounce forwards that we can observe very easily in our response to COVID is how quickly we went online, how quickly we digitalized. It would have probably taken us maybe 5 years, maybe even 10 years for some to sort of go to digital. But with COVID, we digitalized perhaps in 2 to 3 months. In the education side, I mean, I'm in the education sector at the moment, and we digitalized almost within 2 weeks. That was the sort of time scale we had to respond to sort of go to online education. So this is all about sort of making sure that we need to look at and use innovation. And I think the idea of innovation clusters that Girish talked about is very, very important. There is that we to sort of move forward. But the key thing is that we need all of these three key bases to be resilient and dynamic in our recoveries. And the innovation part is the one which actually sort of allows you to have strong transitions and hopefully transformations. So the question that I really want to sort of end with is, do we as individuals, families, cities, nations, the world have the strength and the capacity and the will to reset for the future? So we have to sort of look at it and reset ourselves to look at the future rather than the back. What I see is that COVID is actually sort of interesting because it has presented us with a genuine opportunity to address the limitations that we've had or in the past of the way we do things in our economies, the way we approach economic development. We usually just look at it as growth rather than sort of growth with what? Our financial structures and also our mindset. So we are at a cusp of systemic shifts, and it really depends on us looking at this and asking some fundamental questions as to how we move forward. I would sort of move on with, as Mahatma Gandhi once famously said, he said, the world has enough for everyone's needs, but not for everyone's greed. So I guess what I'm asking here is that we must shift from our tough boy capitalism view of the world to a compassionate capitalism. And as our chairman at Sunway actually often likes to quote, he says, thanks to Jeffrey Cheer says, we can do well by doing good. And I think this is where we have to look at development. We have to look at urban development. And we're talking about SDGs and inclusiveness, but we have to sort of make those big changes that need to be sort of conducted. So I will sort of illustrate some of these through various examples later on if in the Q&A. But I guess my last point here is, yes, we have these three bases, but we need to actually have governance. We need to have effective governance where we bring different parties together. And here, I think we need to have strong communications, strong coordination, and strong collaboration, and lastly, coherence. This is 4 C's. And leadership really plays a very important and vital role in realizing our dreams. And we need to have those long-term aspirations. For Sunway City, for example, thanks to Jeffrey Cheer has set a goal, and that goal is Sunway will be a carbon neutral city by 2050. I think we all need to sort of set these goals. We have to sort of look at what we actually sort of want for our world and what kind of stewards we want for our future generations, and ask those questions, and then move on to how we develop our cities and develop our nations. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Professor. And one thing that really stuck with me is that the process of digitization and how quickly it accelerated during COVID, and when pushed, we innovate faster. And how is it that we can continue to maintain that momentum and make further progress in that space is going to be quite important to achieve the ambitious goals that we do need to set, such as a carbon-free by 2050 city. Maybe now it looks like Dr. Suryani is connected and able to go. I've introduced her before, so I won't redo that, but maybe I could invite Dr. Suryani to speak now. Thank you.
Datuk Suryani, please unmute yourself.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Forney. I'm sorry we lost each other for a while just now. I'm glad we found back. Okay. Very good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, and wherever you are. I would like to first congratulate Urbanized Malaysia for organizing this Malaysia Urban Forum. And thank you for inviting me for this very, very important dialogue. I only have very, very little time today, only 5 minutes to talk. So I'll be very, very brief and very, very fast in my presentation. And perhaps my presentation will be on the perspective of the entrepreneur sector. It's certainly a pleasure to address this interesting subject today because it touches our lives, your life, my life, our children's life, the inclusiveness of ourselves. Now, we know that inclusive growth is economic growth that is distributed fairly across society and creates opportunities for all. Shared prosperity is Malaysian government's effort to ensure that Malaysia continues to grow sustainably through an equitable and inclusive economic distribution. This effort will narrow the economic gap while increasing income and participation in the supply chain. We have the National Entrepreneurship Policy 2030 or NEP 2030. In Malay, it's the Dasar Keusahawanan Negara 2030. It has been aligned with the aspiration of Shared Prosperity Vision 2030 or SPV 2030. In Malay, it's called Wawasan Kemakmuran Bersama 2030. So the NEP 2030 is a long-term strategic document. It was crafted to set the direction of the country's entrepreneurship development to make Malaysia an entrepreneur nation by 2030. To fulfill this aspiration, a dynamic entrepreneurship ecosystem is being created to ensure all segments of the society can benefit from it. So this is the inclusivity part that we are concerned about. So there are 5 objectives outlined in the NEP 2030. First is to create a holistic and conducive entrepreneurship ecosystem for sustainable, balanced and inclusive socio-economic development in Malaysia. The second is to develop a Malaysian community with an entrepreneurial mindset and culture. The third, to produce quality, viable, resilient and competitive entrepreneurs with a global mindset. To scale up local enterprises and SMEs. And the fifth is to make entrepreneurship as a preferred career of choice. So the SPV can only be realized when economic growth and wealth benefits the marginalized, so their needs and well-being are taken care of. When this vision is materialized, the whole country benefits and no one will be left behind in Malaysia's growth. We all know the pandemic has strained healthcare systems, disrupted the education system, the businesses and economies, and it has led to job losses and disrupted social life and mental health with lockdowns and other stringent measures aimed at containing the virus. So the Ministry of Entrepreneur Development and Cooperatives, MIDAC, has carried out a survey to gauge the impact of MCO 3.0 on the SME sector, micro enterprises and informal businesses. We discovered from the survey that 580,000 businesses representing 49% of the MSME sector are at a risk of failing by October if they are not allowed to open up their operations by then. The survey also discovered that more than 7 million Malaysians are expected to be unemployed and more than 60% of entrepreneurs surveyed are facing some forms of mental health issues due to the pandemic. So moving forward, MIDAC has introduced the recovery plan for entrepreneurs and cooperatives in May 2020 aimed at supporting the entrepreneurship ecosystem, restoring entrepreneurs' business operations in the immediate term, and ensuring entrepreneurs remain competitive and resilient. The recovery plan outlines 6 strategies which include, number 1, boosting people's confidence, number 2, strengthening capability and capacity of entrepreneurs, number 3, improving access and assistance to financing, number 4, increasing technology adoption, number 5, expanding market access, and number 6, enhancing service delivery. The recovery plan will benefit more than 12,000 recipients, including youth, women, and the disabled, micro enterprises, SMEs, and cooperatives. So this is very, very inclusive. This plan is part of the pathway to inclusive growth and resilient economic recovery. So ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, we need to strengthen policy integration to capitalize on synergy across economic, social, and environmental goals. Integration is essential to balance divergent economy, social and environment priorities, and to maximize synergies and minimizing trade-off at all stages of policy-making process. This could be done by ensuring whole of government coordination, which can bring together the parts of government that have key role for containing pandemic and protecting people. Finally, we need to engage with key stakeholders. Major barriers for policy coherence are strongly rooted in differing perception of stakeholders on the challenges and priorities for transitioning towards sustainable development. So there is a need to establish mechanisms such as dialogue and engagement to identify common challenges, set priorities, contribute to the development of law and regulations, align policies and action, and mobilize resources for sustainable development. MIDAC acts as the ministry to coordinate the efficacies of entrepreneurship initiatives that are carried out by various government ministries and agencies. This coordination is important to ensure the effectiveness of the initiatives will contribute and support the National Entrepreneurship Policy 2030. This will also realize the concept of shared prosperity that was translated through the creation of Malaysia as an entrepreneur nation by 2020. With that, I thank you so much and hope that everyone will benefit from this forum. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Forini.
Thank you very much, Dr. Suryani. You have a very important role in the recovery of Malaysia in enabling entrepreneurs to recover, especially when they're often the most vulnerable to a situation like COVID is incredibly important to restart economic activity and to enable the necessary employment generation, because it's really the entrepreneurs who are going to drive this recovery in many ways. And so I'm sure you have a very full plate, and thank you very much for participating in this session. It looks as well like our final guest, Dr. Seri Hasnul Zamzam, is connected now, and maybe we can go to him. I've already done this introduction, so I won't repeat that, but maybe I could ask you to speak now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Forni, for moderating this session. Good morning, everybody, and to all distinguished speakers today. I would like to thank the organizer for inviting the ministry to share some thoughts and also initiatives and efforts that has been played by the ministry in helping us all to come out well in the challenging situation we are facing now. As we know that even though things are not that good, but it's not all too bad. I'm sure with some figures coming in for the past one quarter, and more figures will be coming in the next few quarters, better numbers will be dropped in and reported. That is the confidence that we have at the ministry level, while we are continue to work with all industry players to make sure that the transition that they are having now, starting to open up their businesses and get the activities going, is well supported by existing government policies. And in the context of domestic trade, the government or through the ministry is playing a very important role. We have been in the high-level meetings with the National Security Councils, chaired by either Yang Mohamad, Prime Minister, or the Director Generals of National Security Councils. We have been bringing in ideas from the industries to strategize on how to quickly open up businesses, allow more economic activities to take place through introductions and development of SOPs that is relevant according to the different periods of development of the challenges that we are facing with regard to the COVID-19 situation in the country. So yes, there are a lot of SOPs claimed by many people, but I agree to the idea that it's time for us to have a relook and have a more simplified and general SOPs so that we can move on forward with more ease and understanding among the players in the industries, as well as the consumers and also the rakyat. So far, recently, we have opened up a few more industry sectors, 22 to be exact, and we have about a dozen more that are being finalized, that we are working on the SOPs and the risk assessments that we have to do to make sure the business interactions between public and the businesses are not are well taken care of and doesn't pose too much risk, since we are still on the high side in terms of daily infection rates that have been reporting for the past many months. We also have been engaging businesses constantly on how to further revise and refine their modus operandi in terms of doing their businesses, because there are still some leftovers within the industries that kind of restrict them from going 100% into their businesses. And apart from that, we also have been playing our role in establishing certain vaccination centers, specifically for retail industries and wholesale industries. This is actually to accelerate the vaccination process for the workers in those industries, with the coordination and contribution by the respective industries themselves, by providing spaces and also manpower, so that workers within that particular industry can be quickly vaccinated. And with high level of vaccination among workers within that industry, we believe that more and more businesses can be opened, because now the public or the consumers can be quite sensitive on whether the businesses that they are dealing with offers them certain levels of assurances in terms of the number of workers that have been vaccinated to date. I'm glad to say that with that special vaccination center that we call REVAC, whereby we have opened up to 10 so far throughout the country, we have managed to accelerate vaccination of up to 50,000 workers in the retail industries and also in the wholesale industries. So I think this is going to go on in order to make sure that the business landscape and the business environment is safe for everyone, and that kind of confidence can further improve and boost economic activities and business activities. As we have seen for the past few weeks, despite government allowing more businesses to open, including dine-in and all that, but the acceptance by the public is kind of being quite cautious, knowing that the number of infection cases are still high, and also the number of people being already vaccinated completely are also still not that high, even though the progress of vaccination has been going on very well for the past few months. So I think with that effort, we will able to prepare the landscape for businesses to really reach the 100% capacity in the next few weeks. And with that, I think there'll be more opportunities for the economy and the businesses to get back to their normal self within the next few weeks. But I think more importantly is that the realization that it's not just about opening the shops and opening the businesses, but also on how to prepare ourselves to be more resilient in terms of our business landscape, so that we are more prepared for future challenges. For example, with the coming up of various variants of the virus, and also the possibility, which we cannot discount, of future waves of infections of this virus. So I think it's important for us to really prepare the business industries with something that is that can make them more resilient moving forward. So in this context, the industry is also supporting different ways of doing things, different ways of doing businesses, both on the part of businesses and as well as on the part of the consumers. So digitalization and e-commerce, I think, is always the answer moving forward. And we have a few programs in the ministry that support digitalization effort by the business community as well as the consumers. And we are going to work together with many other parties to make sure that people are more acceptable and receptive of the idea of moving or shifting the platform of doing business from the normal ways of doing things in the past years to the new ways of doing things. And I think this is very important, especially in terms of trying to get our businesses to go global and to reach out to many more customers and not just rely on the local or domestic customers. So our businesses must be prepared and pushed to adopt digital platform to enhance their business so that they can gather the momentum for their businesses as fast as possible by not just relying on domestic markets. I think I stop that at that point for my initial sharing for this session. Thank you very much to the organizer.
Thank you very much. I think it's a real challenge in terms of thinking through how businesses will restart, and in a complex period where Malaysia is performing quite well globally with regards to vaccinations, there's still lingering challenges with regards to how to open with more consumer-facing and more people-intensive activities versus less, and thinking through that opening and thinking through how growth can restart is a huge challenge. What I'd like to do now is maybe I will start with just maybe 2 questions to the panel, maybe 3. And I'd like to ask session participants to go to the Q&A session. The Q&A in the conversations part of your screen, to ask any questions you'd like to ask as well, and then I'll try to pull some questions from the chats as well that are phrased more in the shape of questions rather than statements. But maybe the first thing I'd like to do is maybe to first ask Suryani, and then I think second to ask Duduk Seri Zamzam what kind of policy should the government be thinking about, not just necessarily in Malaysia, but around the world? What is the right kind of economic restarting type of activities the government can support? Pushing towards digitalization and these types of things, businesses are adapting and responding to. But there's challenges with regards to just access to credit. There's challenges with regards to having sufficient demand for goods and services, and there's just a number of unemployed individuals who've been unemployed for quite a long time, and there's a number of different policy approaches that are being taken around the world, and it would just be good to get both of your perspectives from where you sit, starting with the more entrepreneurial perspective from Dr. Suryani, and then moving to Dr. Seri Hasnal Zamzam for the more institutional type of perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Forney. I'll answer that first because it's very much related to where I'm serving now. In my presentation just now, I mentioned about the National Entrepreneurship Policy. So one of the major objective of our policy is actually to create an entrepreneurial nation, whereby we are planning to turn people's perspective and make entrepreneur as a career for them. So even for the those who are graduating from the universities, we're trying to educate them that entrepreneur is the way that they should be looking at once they complete their studies in the university. What we want them to be is not to be too dependent on going to find an employer to hire them, we want them to employ themselves, and they become the employee of their own organization. They become the employer. So in our country, in Malaysia, we have under my ministry, there are a few agencies that could help them start their businesses. So, but before that, they should also equip themselves with education. They need to be knowledgeable. They have to have a lot of information in themselves. So we have an institute, we call it Institute Keusahawanan Negara, National Entrepreneur Institute, where we train them. We train those who have just graduated. We also train those who have already been in the business but need help to further enhance their capabilities in the business area. And these are the one of the institutions. And we also have agencies to provide funds, loans to help them start their businesses or expand their businesses. But some of the agencies, if you want these funds, you need to go through a certain courses so that they are well prepared once they go into the business area. So these are the things that we want people to be in. Now it's about surviving. Yeah, the pandemic has affected all of us. They have lost their jobs. They are already in totally different platform altogether. They have been working before 9 to 5, but now they've lost their jobs. The employees can't hire them anymore because they can't pay their salaries. So we want them to be their own employer. So they should embark on doing their own businesses. So we are here to help. And this is also the time where we start our businesses on a digital platform. They must digitalize their businesses. They must put themselves on the e-commerce platform so that people would be able to get to them, and their businesses will be further outreach, and more people will be able to get to know them, and they can actually sell even better all over the world. So these are the things that we can help through our agencies in the Ministry of Entrepreneur Development and Cooperatives.
Thank you. And then maybe over to Dr. Hasno Zamzam.
Yeah, one of the things that we focus and do a lot in the ministry to get things going on the ground is to look at challenges in the context of doing businesses. Focus on activities that can ease doing businesses in the industry. So that's why we have been conducting roundtable discussions and meetings with various players and groups, so that we can get feedback and understand what are the real challenges faced by each of them. So through understanding, then we can see whether their actual challenges are whether with regard to resources, or with regard to mindset, or with regard to legal frameworks, process, procedures, and whatnot. So we will channel all these findings through relevant ministries, because not everything is under the purview and powers of our ministry to resolve it. And we also always have a higher level discussion among captains of the ministries, either at the level of the Secretary General or the ministers themselves, to address some of the issues posed by the industry's players. So far, we have been working together well with the industries. And for example, during the lockdown period and the challenging periods, we have through SSM make life easier for businesses. Like for example, with the company Security Malaysia, we have allowed compound reduction payment up to 60%, and given them extension time for companies to distribute financial statements so that they don't have to be punished for not being able to follow the procedures and the guidelines in place. Same thing with regard to holding annual general meetings, submitting financial statements, and also introducing some special schemes to allow people to register either free or at a much reduced cost. And we also have a review the level or the threshold for indebtedness, which was previously at RM 10,000 ringgit. Now we have increased it to RM 50,000 ringgit. In that, if you are in indebtedness below RM 50,000 ringgit, the businesses are protected from being taken to court or facing legal actions. We also have simplified a lot of processes, and you have make things simplified, like extending the validity of a license period, reducing the license fees, the permit fees. We have also make things less compulsory. For example, withhold enforce some enforcement activities to some aspects of businesses and regulations, so that there are room for businesses to actually focus more on their business activities rather than worry about some of the legal requirements or procedures that they have to follow for the time being. So many of those facilities are allowed until end of the year, but we are going to review it if there is a possibility or there is a need to further extend the facilities. Then we will be able to sit down, then consider it for the purpose and benefit of the business platform.
Thanks. And I think that's clear from both of you, and having a good sense of trying to move forward and enable entrepreneurs and provide the institutional support that businesses need. Maybe I can go next to Girish and ask, in thinking about innovation zones and these types of entrepreneurial types of areas that have a good agglomeration of people and skills and energy and creativity, cities all around the world where we work are looking to replicate the same. And it's not very straightforward beyond the desire to put something in place in terms of what are the key factors that a government can put in place to enable these types of zones to flourish, as opposed to becoming zones that never really materialize. And I can think of a couple of examples in Latin America that have been innovation zones in very low income areas for a decade or two. It hasn't worked. So what would you say are these key enabling factors that we need to think about in the context of Malaysia or other ASEAN countries?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think this is the ultimate question, right? Which everybody keeps asking, and I've been going around talking quite heavily on innovation districts, especially in the last 12 months. The government, in my opinion, shouldn't be too involved. I think this is the first problem we have, because we expect the government to lead innovation, and this is where it becomes, it doesn't really work. But from a policy point of view, yes, I do believe the government needs to put in all the policies that are necessary to drive investment, number one. And what Datuk Suryani was talking about, the collaboration between entrepreneurs and academia, as well as provide incentives for people to actually produce commercially viable technologies that can be rolled out by entrepreneurs. So it involves an ecosystem, is the word you used earlier, and this is the one, even Professor Parvez mentioned this. It's this gelling of the ecosystem and having the right policies in place, and try not to have federal policies that are very high level. I think we need to go down to state level, district, local council level, and to have developer incentives. There's a lot of land in Malaysia. There's a lot of industrial parks in Malaysia which need rejuvenation. So what are those policies that we can give to every single person in the ecosystem? It's not a single policy. It's a complex set of policies here, so that everyone has got something that would benefit them and they would participate. So whether you're in the university, or whether you are a science R&D person, whether you're a researcher, or whether you are a startup, whether you are a banker, a venture capital. So these are the people in the ecosystem. Now the way to do it is to find a natural economic cluster. This is very crucial. We cannot drop economic activities that are not natural clusters in Malaysia. So if I just take a single example of palm oil, yeah, just take palm oil. It's one of the biggest exports in Malaysia. It generates 1.5 million jobs in Malaysia alone. And just look at the downstream opportunities in palm oil. For example, phenolics. Yeah, phenolics in the nutraceutical market is a 2 trillion US economy growing at 8%. Now we can do this. We have the waste from it. We have the biotechnology centers. We have the academics who are writing heavily on all of this. We have people who are keen to invest. So if we orchestrate this around a natural cluster, E&E Semiconductors is the other one, which we do have a natural cluster. We have a natural cluster to develop some very interesting tourism products as well, which are quite unique. So use the natural clusters to take them forward, create the innovation jobs, and government focus on policy. Projects and programs should be private sector driven 100%. I think this is very, very important, and we should not have any government linked companies that are being forced to go into this because it's about making money, right? It's about innovation that can be commercialized to solve problems, solve challenges, urban challenges, last mile challenges or rising prices. We heard about affordable homes, So how do we use innovation to solve the problems and move forward?
No, I think finding the right existing areas of expertise in like palm and like semiconductors makes a lot of sense. And I can say the number of cities that want to invest in financial centers where they may not even have the right capital controls to be able to make that happen as an international financial center is maybe not the right way to go about it. So certainly making sure that you're targeted, looking at urban regeneration maybe as part of that process to harness natural clusters is certainly a good approach.
Maybe Mark, I'd just like to add.
Yeah,
you asked this question about what should policymakers do in the short term to get those jobs out, right? I'm not sure whether we have done enough thinking about healthcare. In the next 2 to 3 years, any government out there is already focusing billions in healthcare. Now, if we quickly sit and look at all the unemployed graduates and people out there and get them short-term jobs, I think Minister Khairi has already been doing some of this with the private sector. But let's focus on using healthcare as a short-term sector on how we can fill up these jobs that have been lost. And I think it'll be money well spent as well because we're solving two problems at the same time. So these are anything to do with making sure people are safe, making sure they are healthy, their mental health, and going all the way down to even manufacturing. It's a great time to get into manufacturing of whatever it is, face masks or innovation in face masks and so on. So I think maybe we should really look at healthcare as a short-term focus, as a nation as well as all countries in the world, and by more innovation we'll be able to reduce the cost of healthcare alone. The healthcare over GDP is extremely high in the Western nations, and it's rising in Malaysia and Asia as well.
Mark, could I just add something?
Please.
Please, thank you very much. I just wanted to follow up from where Girish was in terms of what the government could do. And I was looking at it, health is very interesting, but I think long-term we should be looking at the government should be looking to focus on the circular economy aspect, because if we look at that circular economy, I think there's major trade-offs and benefits that can be gained. I was looking at the example of the Netherlands, who've actually looked at and tried to implement circular economy there, and they've looked at and done a mapping of the skills that are needed, the jobs that are going to be created, and they're noticing that there's a major, very strong multiplier positive spillover effect of actually looking at and changing our industries, moving them forward rather than just being traditional industries doing what they've been doing. Look at the planet and move forward in that direction. So I think circular economy is something that really all sectors can actually engage, whether they're healthcare, whether they're E&D or whichever sector it is. I think we really need to sort of move ourselves into that direction. And I think policy is really needed to sort of guide us along that way.
I think, this is a good point. And I think, there's so many different ways to catalyze an economy. And this environment of such a dramatic and interfaceted, basically long duration disaster in some ways requires policymakers, leaders, business, of government to think really differently about job creation and circular economy, and how is it that you map and identify the necessary labor force is a good way to look at that, combined with, let's say, different types of short-term or medium-term jobs in the healthcare sector, combined with, let's say, we see in the chat box a lot of discussion about bike paths and about increasing, let's say, bicycle mobility that requires some minimal construction works. And then I would take that a step farther, and I'm from the United States, and during the Great Depression in the United States, one of the most effective job creation tools was called the Civilian Conservation Corps. And this group built the national parks in the United States. And I don't know if anybody here has been to those national parks, but basically that was hundreds of thousands of people 100 years ago that did an enormous amount of public works that are enjoyed today, that were enjoyed today free to the public. And if we think of even other ideas, moving towards a green economy, the retrofitting of buildings, so public buildings or private buildings, for what we find in ASEAN countries is for about $1 million of investment, or for every $1 million of investment in these types of interventions, employment generation is between 25 and 30 jobs. And that may not sound like a huge labor uptake, but the amount of investment that would be required is fairly substantial. And most importantly, those investments can be paid back between 2 and 4 years, depending on the types of interventions. So, looking at labor-intensive moves toward the green economy, the circular economy, improving access to public spaces and mobility, healthcare, there's a wide range of things for policymakers to explore and to sort of compare the costs and benefits of what it's going to take to catalyze these activities. What's going to be the role of the public sector? What is the role of entrepreneurs to take this a step further? And how can the institutional support be brought to businesses that sort of scale up these types of activities? Maybe just staying on this theme, I can ask, I'm not sure, Beatrice, if you have any ideas of sort of some of these things that could be kickstarted, or maybe on a related point, how it is that we can take and share good practices across ASEAN countries to understand, well, here's a cool unemployment or employment generation program in Thailand that's working pretty well, or here's something pretty interesting in Vietnam that could be taken to Malaysia, because it is this space for open thinking and brainstorming and innovation. So, I'd be curious to hear your ideas.
Yeah. Okay. So every city, let's go with cities instead of countries first. But every city has something of value that they have implemented. They have practiced and spent years, and they've had their own think tanks getting together and making it very viable. And that's something that they finally implemented. It could be infrastructure. It could be a way of getting food out easily from where they are produced to where the cities are. It could be the way nature is in harmony with the cities itself. And they've all done it pretty well. But we need more dialogues between them and us, and to be able to compare notes. And in ASEAN, we are very similar. I mean, we have a similar climate, similar group of people, languages and cultures differ, but we are very similar. And all we need to do is to be able to tap into the expertise that we can glean from our neighbors and be able to use that, come back and be able to implement that in our cities, in our states. So that's what I would think we should do a bit of more. We should have a lot of open dialogues and not just with the government, with businesses. How the businesses there work with the governments. And as you were saying earlier, as Girish pointed out, and I'm totally agree with Girish, we need to let the businesses, the entrepreneurs drive the way, because they have done it from scratch. They know what works, what doesn't work, and it is in their best interest to be able to actually create a great economy, because when they benefit, when one man benefits, the entire society benefits. So when we let it be led by the entrepreneurs, everything, the entire country develops by itself. So less policies should be there to be able to support and facilitate the drive and the trust by the businesses. So we must be able to let the entrepreneurs rise and to be able to speak and to be able to lead. And it's really hard to teach innovation. Innovation and entrepreneurship, in my opinion, is really hard to teach someone that. It's something that comes from a heart space. It's something that comes from a heart space. It's something I have to repeat. When you have nowhere to go and your back is against the wall and you got to find a way out of it, that's when you innovate. So to be able to have a problem and solve it, that's innovation. To be able to find a way to be able to bring resources in, that's entrepreneurship. And that's not something we can teach. It's something that's got to be felt and done. And the only way our policies can help is to facilitate that. There is that spark in many of us. And when we have that, and when you have budding entrepreneurs or innovators or people come up with ideas, I think the only way we can merge this both is to be able to facilitate it, to be able to level the whole field so that it becomes easy for innovation to happen. And that's the crux of it. We must allow innovation to happen. We must allow entrepreneurship to happen on its own. And that's why when we have a lot of dialogues between countries in ASEAN, we get to tap into all of that excellence that has been curated over the years, and then we bring that back to us. So that would be how we could probably merge the expertise and experiences, policies within the countries to one.
No, it's a good point, and I also agree that entrepreneurship is something inside, and how it is that we can try to find that within us is really important, and that's something that, as you say, is very difficult to teach, or maybe impossible. And I sometimes find myself as a bit of an entrepreneur within the World Bank, and sometimes it's very exciting, and then sometimes it's a little bit more risky.
Yeah.
And obviously in an institution, you don't get the upside of being an entrepreneur, right? You create something great for your organization, but you don't have the same personal benefits. But that's, but the downside, and protecting that downside to enable the establishment of these clusters, to really bring that energy, there needs to be some downside protection. And this is where I'm curious from Dr. Suryani in terms of the downside protection of entrepreneurs, and how you think about that, so that people feel confident to take a risk, that they feel confident to do something that people tell them is impossible. Because that's really what, to me, an entrepreneur is saying, this can be done even though nobody else thinks it can. Sometimes it can't, sometimes it can, and that's how we get the innovation. And so I'm curious from your perspective in supporting entrepreneurs, what type of safety net would you think, or what type of backstopping would be necessary or is most beneficial to enable that entrepreneurial energy that creates jobs, that can maybe concentrate in clusters, that can really move forward the trajectory of cities and of Malaysia?
Thanks, Farni. This is a very interesting question. What the entrepreneurs really have to prepare themselves before embarking into any business is to really have this resilient in themselves first. They have to be very, very brave to want to be participating in the business area. But if you want to do so, it's really, if you work hard, you will be able to gain your benefit, and the fruit of your labor will be there if you're patient, and if you have enough knowledge with you, and you have enough training, and you have enough information that you should be getting before embarking into the business area. So Tiba posed a question in the group here. The question is about the social protection, the guarantee of social protection. Yeah, I might be able to address that, but I'm just telling you that the government does not have an initiative, for the social protection to the entrepreneurs, especially fresh graduates. But we encourage them to have their own safety nets. We want to educate the entrepreneurs out there that they have to be able to do this on their own. The banks, some of the insurance agencies are doing this, so they have to be able to engage with these agencies who are providing this type of services. On the government side, we do not have a specific initiative for this, because it's rather broad, the kind of social protection, and there are a lot of things that the entrepreneurs should be also looking at once they want to embark in the business areas. We do encourage them to have this kind of social safety nets, but it's not through the government. Perhaps on their own, from the private sector, that can be offering the same services to them. I just want to share with all of you here, that the government has embarked on a council. We call it the National Employment Council, whereby we meet up. The council is being chaired by the Prime Minister. It's about creating jobs. We are planning. This is a year-long plan until the end of the year. So MIDAC is one of those who are contributing to this National Employment Council. On our side, we are creating this attachment for fresh graduates to be at certain projects for a couple of months, from within 3 to 6 months, and they will be attached to these projects. And once they're there, they will be exposed to the business, the way of doing business in that company, or in that project. By the end of their 6 months attachments, they'll be able to know how to, if not all, they would know how to conduct a business, because they'll be exposed to the administration of the business, how they should be arranging for the financial, the human resources. They will be exposed to those kind of responsibilities in those areas. So for those fresh graduates, there are still a lot of opportunities out there. The Ministry of Human Resources also have their programs as well, in encouraging unemployment to come to go to them, and they will be able to assist. All they need to do is really to reach out to the ministries, to the relevant agencies. Come to us, to MIDAC, look for us in our portal. We are able to help you through we call it Protege. This program for fresh graduate is called Protege. There are also other programs, perhaps other ministries are also doing about the same, to create jobs for those who are unemployed at this point of time. So I hope I have answered Tiba. On government side, there is no specific initiatives for the social protection. Yeah.
I have a question. What is the definition of social protection?
It can be in the form of insurance for the company, in perhaps if they met with some natural disasters or something. That's an example. Those kind of social protection. So what do they have? It's like a life insurance for yourself. So this is insurance for the company. That's one of the examples.
Oh, insurance for the company if it should collapse.
One of the examples.
Oh, okay.
And it can be a broad range of things, from social
broad
payments to retirement and pension benefits, to benefits for targeted populations, let's say the poor and vulnerable. And in certain places, in certain countries, you have entrepreneurship programs that may provide a small stipend to potential entrepreneurs. If you guys know Peter Thiel, the big Silicon Valley guy, he provides a stipend for people to skip college in the U.S. and try to create a business. So there's different types of these programs, but I also think, Beatrice, the point you make about failure as part of entrepreneurship is also, very relevant. So how is it that you balance that line of making sure that you have enough at risk without having a situation where you're left completely destitute?
Because it's very subjective, Again, if we are going to teach everything, then we are, okay, pardon me, but you're mollycoddling someone to the point that they can't survive without all that mollycoddling. I mean, I started from scratch, zero, no backing, and it's been a long, hard journey, but it's a lot of failure, a lot of mistakes, but that's how you learn. If you're mollycoddled to the core from the very beginning, how is this going to work to be a successful entrepreneur who's going to be able to sustain his or her journey without eventually all that, help? That's always been a puzzle to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think how help is defined and how things are incentivized by government or by individuals or by foundations, varies quite a lot. And in different areas of industry and different types of, let's say, social entrepreneurship may be a very different thing than starting a commercial business. So, for example, if you intend to create an opportunity for the poor and vulnerable to have better access to water, and this is a very low margin type of thing, that's a little bit different. And at least in the U.S. and the West, you have certain foundations, big foundations that provide certain types of grants and stipends. If you go to Silicon Valley, you're not going to get that grant or stipend. So there's a balance between the social good of different types of interventions or businesses or ideas and pure profit making, where if you succeed, you make $1 billion. So there's, I think, from a government policy perspective, how do you encourage those individuals who want to target a different market, whose objective isn't to have a new idea and get super rich, but maybe it's to solve a social problem, and that social problem is being solved, is going to be something that is never going to have a high financial reward, but you don't want to run like a nonprofit. And how is it that you can create the right incentive from a government perspective through some sort of financial support or through some sort of safety net type of approach, similar to, let's say, individuals who graduate university and move into certain industries and engage in certain types of activities that are more for social good, where you have government supporting their loan payments, for example. But it's because they're doing something.
But isn't that an NGO? Isn't that the definition of an NGO?
No. Because with an NGO, then you're guaranteed, and you get to exactly the point that you make, which is you're dependent on those grants and you're dependent on those foundations. What you're looking for more is how is it that you can provide a little bit of jumpstart support. Oftentimes with, let's say, a network of interrelated groups, there's a number of organizations like Echo and Green in the United States that provide these types of incentives to businesses, and those are capitalized by big entrepreneurs who want to create a different type of product or a different type of social good out there. And this is something that pre-COVID had some momentum before the financial crisis, and that sort of started to fall away in terms of these types of funding mechanisms. And this could be a time to bring some of those types of ideas back, or to scale up those types of ideas. Because when we take a step back, who's the most impacted? I can say, and this is where I want to maybe go to Professor Pervez as well, from an ethics perspective and a social responsibility perspective, I can say I spent the first 6 months of the pandemic in Washington, and that wasn't very easy, but I have a knowledge job, so I could be on a computer all day, and many, many people could not. Similarly, now in Hanoi, it's a very strict lockdown. I can barely leave my house. but I'm much better off than so many of those that are in the city. And what is the government's responsibility to try to limit that that increasing disconnect between the better off and the not as well off? And how can the government provide certain types of, what is the role of government to provide the support for those that are massively impacted, that are struggling to eat, that are struggling on a daily basis, and what's the ethical and the social responsibility that's associated with the government, or with foundations and other types of support. Given Professor Pervez, I noticed in your bio, I thought it was interesting, that you work and read and write on ethics and social responsibility. I'd be very interested in this question, because this is a fundamental question that I think is becoming more and more relevant around the world. What is the government and the people's responsibility to those that simply can't cope with a lockdown?
Apologies, I was just muted. Thank you very much for a very important question, Mark. I think it is a fundamental question. So this is what I was initially saying, that we really need to ask ourselves exactly what type of societies we want, what type of world we want for ourselves. And it is a normative question, it's an ethical question as to where do we actually want to go. We are talking about resilience, but resilience for whom and how. So these are very important questions that we need to frame ourselves. My approach really comes from a ethics of care perspective. So I feel that it is a duty. It is a duty that is incumbent on us as individuals, as organizations, to actually care for others. So it is ethics of care comes from a kind of a feminist perspective. It's kind of a nurturance perspective, where you care, like you care for a child. You give to them without actually expecting return. So what we have to look at is really to be able to actually move. And this is the question I had raised when I ended was, how do you move away from this tough boy capitalism? Everything is for me, everything is for the individual. Where do we actually start saying, I can actually gain by giving to others. I may not gain in monetary terms, but I may actually get other rewards. I may have happiness that I wouldn't actually get just through pure accumulation of funds. So ethics of care is fundamental. I think we have to start embedding that into our notions and our mindsets and our attitudes to change the way society thinks about these issues. But I also think, besides the philosophical approach, we have to really understand vulnerable communities. Who are the vulnerable groups, for example, and what is the kind of vulnerability that actually we have? So in the COVID environment, actually, you can see that vulnerabilities are everywhere. Businesses are vulnerable, so that's a vulnerable group. CEOs are vulnerable. They are trying to keep the business alive. They're trying to keep their employees in jobs, and they're stressed. They're mentally stressed, and they have emotional stress. So we owe a duty. So it's not the traditional notion of vulnerability and who's a vulnerable group. So I think we have to look at a whole set when we're looking at governments to say, okay, they are very different heterogeneous vulnerable groups. The level of vulnerability is very different. And yes, of course, the B40 is the normal group that we actually focus in on. But over here, I think it's incumbent on us to, this is about the sensing part. The first part I said, we have to have the absorptive capability. We have to understand what is taking place. Exactly what are the needs of these particular, say, the B40 group. And the B40 group is not homogeneous as well. It's very heterogeneous. So you have to go down to the community level. You have to really understand the needs and the issues that they're facing. And then you have to respond to that. So I think when we're looking at this, ethics of care actually starts at the local level. It looks not at the high level. Yes, philosophically, I can be there, and governments can actually think about that. But it is about changing the mindset of our society to be more caring as we move to the future. So I think it's a really important question that you put forward. It's like Sunway, for example. Sunway as a group is actually very inclined to sort of look after the B40. In the COVID environment, what did they do? They understood that poor children, children from poor families, don't have computers. They can't educate themselves. Yes, we've all moved to online transition, teaching and education, but can they go there? They don't have computers. So the initiative there was to actually give laptops to the B40 families, to the schools that were actually in the poor communities, so they could actually really benefit. So we have to look at how we deliver care, not just that we should care, but what is it that we need to deliver. So we have to customize and be very careful and deliver to those. Some we also created, for example, libraries as well. And then COVID patients, if you're directly impacted by COVID itself and your family, you don't have food on the table. So again, we have an initiative which is called Sunway for Good, in which we provide food, but it is targeted to those particular communities, and we work in partnership with the NGO. So you work in partnership. So and it's quite interesting formula that is actually going to use. Sunway actually purchases the food from its F&B operators in its malls, so the F&B operators are able to survive. Then it actually gets the NGO to distribute it to those who are in need. So those who need the food are able to also survive as well. So I think this is where we need the top. I think if we look at the organization, the conglomerate Sunway, the ethos is set from the very top. What Tan Sri actually views, because of his own personality, his own ethos of caring and doing good, that filters all the way down to the employees, to the organization, and how we do things. So I think it's fundamental. So as I said, you can have the dynamic capabilities, but you have to have the governance, and governance requires leadership and thinking through. And then similarly, we can move up at the government level as well. So our government needs to see how it will care for our society, and it has some very good ideas. I mean, the shared prosperity model, for example, the framework that is being put forward is a very important model to actually switch our thinking and get us to look at and care for others. But however, I think it's also about communications. How do we have an idea, but we need to communicate it, and we have to coordinate it at a societal level, and that's a real challenge. How do we actually change the hearts, the mindsets, and the behaviors of people is where we have the challenge. And I think we really have to change to be more caring and looking after others.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. Now, I wonder, maybe to Dr. Seri Hasnal Zamzam, from a government perspective and an institutional perspective, what is the role of government, and what can government do to try to promote this culture of caring? What kind of incentives, what kind of communication can be done to try to have this balance, particularly for those that are so affected by COVID now, and the fact that there is an income disparity issue in terms of who's affected and the extent that they're affected, both from a doing good and a doing well perspective, but then also from a government stability perspective. We see protests starting to increase in Thailand. Probably you're going to see more and more of these types of movements around the world of people, individuals, especially those who are really suffering, they just can't handle ongoing and continued lockdown. For government stability to maintain its legitimacy, what can the government do to promote that culture of caring in the short term, especially? It's easier in the long term, but now, what would you say the government can do to achieve that?
Yeah, I think the government has demonstrated a continuous position of caring to the issues and challenges faced by the society at large. I think since last year, there have been a lot of programs like Pemulih Plan, Pemulihan Negara, Pemulih Plus, and so many things, Prihatin, ICNAR, for example. If you follow all those initiatives, wage subsidy programs, and then soft loans to entrepreneurs. A lot of supports actually. If you put them together, I think there are maybe more than 20 various programs that have been put in place by the government to show that government is really care about what these people is facing now, especially on the short-term challenges. And at the same time, I think naturally Malaysians also have been coming forward to help each other, either through formal channels or informal channels. And as you know, in this country, there are a lot of organizations at various levels of government, from federal, state, local authorities, civil societies, NGOs. Their religious organizations, they all have come forward to play their part, bits and pieces here and there, to really help people to get going during this difficult time. And at the same time, especially in recent weeks, with large progress in terms of vaccination, government has made a lot of move to open up the economy so that people can quickly restart and revitalize their livelihood so that they can be more independent. And we understand the spirit among our people is that they don't really like to be dependent on government for a long time. All they ask from the government is allow them to go back to their normal ways of living, get their own income, support their life, and be happy with their families. So that's what the government is doing. It's a mixture of strategies the government has been doing. And I think so far, the situation, even though there are pockets of issues here and there, I think that cannot be totally wiped out in any given societies or situation like this. I think situations in Malaysia can be quite commendable in terms of the way the government handles, the way that the society participate and offers assistance to the needed groups, needed community and all that. And also the continuous effort for the government to ease and to get the people back to their normal life as soon as possible. And we even committed that by October, November, December this year, things can be much better for everybody eventually. I think that kind of plans has been quite well communicated. Of course, the issues of communication need to be addressed from time to time, and government must always come forward and explain to people the rationale behind things that they do, things that they have not done, things that they have done, because of course people have many opinions and perspective of things. And one thing that maybe we need to give a more focus more on communications on people who are yet to come out to get their vaccinations, either because of their state point of view that vaccination is something that of their own personal rights, or because of lack of information that they thought that vaccination is something that's not of a guarantee that can overcome the issues of this COVID-19. So this is one area that I think government must work more, and not just for the government to do it alone. This whole of society concept and approach must be applied to make sure that more and more people come forward and get themselves vaccinated so that they can be not left behind in terms of grabbing the opportunity when all the activities, economic activities are allowed to open in the near future.
Thank you. And I think this is a good way to wrap up the discussion that I personally found quite interesting. When you bring together different people from different perspectives, from media, from different parts of government, working with entrepreneurs, working with consumers, working in zones, and you have a much broader conversation about where we stand today and how we should think about going forward. And if there's anything that I could close with, it's that this event, COVID-19, has been transformative. In the case of, especially in Vietnam right now, it's an extremely difficult and challenging situation. People are really suffering, and people around the world have really suffered. Malaysia has done quite a good job in vaccination and is moving towards opening up, but many countries still aren't there. And there's going to be increasingly questions about ethics and social responsibility about how this pandemic will be managed in the coming months. And I don't remember who said it exactly, but moving to digitization in a very short period of time as a result of COVID is the trigger of that innovation, the pain of needing to trigger and find a different way to do business and find a different way to interact is what COVID has done from a positive side. And if we could think forward looking, and if we could try to take the lessons from the experience over the last couple of years, we are interconnected. We do need to find ways to solve problems together. We do need to bring different skill sets to the table and different perspectives to the table. And I think most importantly, we have to recognize that when we're all pushed, when our backs are against the wall, and wherever we sit in life, we will find ways to do things new and different. We will find ways to innovate. And we should do as much as we can to take the furthest step back as we possibly can to think about the big picture and the range of options that are at our hands to be able to take forward in terms of new ways to think about organizing and supporting entrepreneurs and societies, new ways to generate jobs, new ways to catalyze entrepreneurialism, new ways to develop in the perspective that we are connected. We are dependent on one another. We do need to embark on a more sustainable path. We do need to increase the resilience of all of us, and we do need to work together to make all of that happen. So maybe with that, I will close the session. I just want to thank the audience for joining and listening closely, and the panelists for doing a great job providing their different perspectives. And I hope the discussion continues throughout the forum over the next couple of days. And thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Mark. All the best to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dato. Thank you, Trainee. Thank you,
Bye.
Dr. Asnan. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dato
Thank you.
Betri.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Girish.
Best moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Right.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. We will see you again in the next session for Business Assembly at 2 p.m. today in the main room. Thank you and have a nice day. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.